You will notice that I did not include sex hormones in the Lab Essential video, and that's because men and women obviously have different hormones and they're applied a little bit differently. So I have separated them out, and this particular video is going to be talking about hormones specifically for women of a certain age, which is perimenopause and menopause. And I do think it's important to spend just a little bit of time here and talk about the what and the when to test hormones. The when is predicated on what pause phase a woman is in, and the what is basically predicated on if she's taken hormones or birth control or what type of HRT she may be using, whether or not it's transdermal or oral. So there's a lot of nuances. And most doctors do not understand the nuances. So again, we have the perimenopausal phase, we have menopausal phase where a woman is not using HRT, and then we have menopause with a woman that is using HRT. So the type of testing that we want to do, again, is predicated on where she falls within that. So we're going to start with the perimenopausal woman. And, perimenopause can be the most volatile time in a woman's life in terms of hormone fluctuation. Puberty comes in at a close second. And that is why I will often not test for some of the things that are listed in the depend section here, which is towards the bottom. And some people may be surprised that I'm not testing these obvious sexual hormones that would determine whether or not a woman is entering perimenopause and where she is actually in that whole perimenopause continuum. So you would think that I would test for estradiol and progesterone, yeah? But the problem is that estradiol can be all over the place. And progesterone, yes, we can see it waning, but then again, it depends on where estrogen or estradiol is in that particular month or that particular cycle. So I don't normally test for that unless I have a woman coming to me who is below the age of 43, definitely below the age of 40, that maybe is exhibiting some perimenopausal symptoms. I may then test for estradiol and progesterone. In the depend column, so that's what we're focusing right now, I may also test a woman who's in perimenopause for FSH and LH, and both of those hormones are indicative of possibly how close she is to menopause and how much she is cycling and whether or not she's actually getting to ovulation. And then I may also test prolactin, and prolactin is a hormone that is made in the pituitary, and if it is elevated, it can push down the production of estrogen and therefore progesterone, because progesterone cannot be made until we have ovulation. And so we can't have ovulation if we don't have enough estrogen and if we don't have enough follicle stimulating hormone, which is FSH. So these are all the depend things. Again, it depends on the age of my woman and the symptoms and signs that she is exhibiting. I mentioned that I'll test FSH and LH to kind of see how close a woman is to menopause. I'll also test that, particularly if she's had an ablation or perhaps her uterus has been removed, and it's hard to see how close she is to the finish line because she's not having any periods. And a woman that may have a Mirena IUD, which actually has progesterone and hormones in the IUD, can also make a difference on what her periods look like and the fluctuation of her hormones. So that's another reason why I may test the FSH and LH. Now, in all perimenopausal women, I do like to see DHEA, it should be an S with that, SHBG, which is your sex hormone binding globulin, just to kind of see how high that is or low. And that kind of will tell me what's going on with thyroid and the sex hormones as well. Cortisol, I like to see. It's just a one-shot test. So it doesn't give me a whole entire picture of what a woman's adrenal glands are doing or what her cortisol is doing throughout the entire day. But usually it's a morning cortisol, so I can kind of see where she is in the morning. And then I do like to see testosterone, especially if I have a woman that is exhibiting some perimenopausal signs or symptoms below the age of 40. Okay. So then the next group of women I like to talk about in the pause years is the woman who's in menopause, and she is not on any type of hormone replacement therapy. And I do know I have clients that come in and say, I am going to make sure that I ask my doctor to test my hormones before I go on HRT. And they might even demand it. But there's really no reason for testing it. And this is the reason why. Your levels are going to be low. They're going to be in the postmenopausal range, which is normal, okay? And the test results are going to come back as normal for postmenopausal range. It doesn't mean that you're going to be in the best place that you can be when it comes to your health, when it comes to hormones, but you're normal for postmenopausal without any HRT. So it doesn't tell me anything. It's not going to tell me anything at all. I do again like to see cortisol, DHEA, and total and free testosterone for the same reasons I like to see it in perimenopause. And in the next slide, you'll see it. I can see this also in menopause with HRT. So these are just kind of basic ones. Of course, we want to make sure that you do everything else that's listed pretty much in the lab work essentials, what's listed there in the video and in your handbook. Menopause essentials with HRT. Now, there's quite a bit of a debate when it comes to testing women who are on HRT. And, lots of times the pushback comes from doctors who historically will only prescribe the lowest dose for HRT, and that low dose will usually get rid of the symptoms like, hot flashes and night sweats and some other, maybe even some vaginal dryness and maybe some incontinence and maybe help with UTIs. It can do all that, but it's not going to be enough to do the heavy lifting, which we kind of want, right? We don't just want to alleviate the symptoms. We want enough hormones on board to prevent osteoporosis, dementia, heart disease, and there's cardiovascular disease and even cancer. All right. So if we are going to be using a higher dosage, and even if we're not, okay, even if we're going for the lowest dosage, I still want to see a woman's estradiol at least to make sure that she's absorbing enough of her hormones and to see where it's at. If we're on a higher dose, we want to make sure that it doesn't go too high, right? We want to make sure it's between about 50 and about 100 nanograms. That's what we're looking for here. And then I do want to see her total and free testosterone. That's important as well. It's kind of hard to get free testosterone in women in particular because it comes is actually a calculation, and it's based on her total testosterone, and women's total testosterone is much less than men's. So it's kind of tough to get that, but I still like to see it. As far as progesterone, again, I'm still in that lower box. That can be a tricky one. And if you are taking oral progesterone, that will be reflected very nicely in serum and blood. If you are doing a transdermal progesterone, that will show up very low in blood. It's more absorbed in the tissue than it is in the blood. So you will look like you are not getting enough progesterone, and there's a likelihood that your doctor may put you on a higher amount of transdermal progesterone when it's actually not needed. In the US, we really don't have suppositories as far as progesterone is concerned, but other parts of the world, the UK, and other parts of Europe, they do have suppositories, and I don't know how they reflect when it comes to serum. I am going to guess that here again, it's more absorbed by the tissue and doesn't really go into the blood. So serum, I would say, is only a good marker for oral progesterone, but not transdermal or suppository progesterone. All right, you'll see the SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin. I want to see that. I want to see cortisol and DHEAS and FSH. Some people think that FSH, if we can get that number down, is kind of a high five type of thing. I'm just more curious to see where that's at. And again, that's a hormone that is is produced in response to trying to get a follicle to stimulate. So when we do HRT, that number can actually go down. It's not going to work as hard. So I mentioned that I do feel like the testing estradiol is important, whether a woman is on a high dose or low dose of estradiol. And in particular, again, I want to make sure that a woman is absorbing enough and want to make sure that she's not a super absorber because we can have that. I, for one, I really absorb my transdermal estrogen, so I have to watch it. And all of these things matter. And of course, it does, you know, testing's important, but in any type of testing, it's a very valuable tool, but we also have to look at the person that is standing in front of us and make sure that the tests match the symptoms. And if they don't, then we need to look a little bit deeper and a little bit harder. Oh, and I didn't mention yet, some people like to do salivary testing when it comes to hormones. And when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, HRT, saliva is not accurate at all. It can be an accurate method for the cycling woman who's still in her fertile years. All right, I do want to just drop another test, and that's called the Dutch test, and that's an acronym for the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. Basically, what it is, you're peeing on a stick and your urine is dried. You pee throughout a 24 hours period. And it is a test that looks at what your body does with hormones and cortisol and melatonin, and it's kind of the downstream. So it's the metabolites of your hormones. It tells us whether or not your body goes down a more inflammatory pathway, which could possibly put you at risk for cancer. And if you are concerned about cancer and about hormones and about being on HRT, I would recommend that you have this type of testing done. And I know some people and doctors as well will, recommend having the BRCA test done just to see if you carry the BRCA gene. While that may be useful to a very small degree, because we have to remember that genes do not necessarily mean that we're going to get something or we're going to have something. It just tells us where our weak spot is. And it is our lifestyle, it's our environment that turns these genes on and off. So I rather see in real time what my body is doing with my hormones. Is my estrogen going down a more inflammatory pathway? What does my body do with progesterone? Does my body take my testosterone down a more powerful pathway, a stronger androgen, to something called DHT, which can influence how well we keep our hair on our heads. Okay, that can be a factor with that. And the fun thing about all this is that we can actually change how things are moving in the pathway through food sometimes and through supplementation. And so it actually gives us a really nice foot up to be able to take control of what our body is doing and know what it needs. It also tests cortisol, and since we're peeing 4 times a day, it does look at the whole rhythm throughout the day and the levels throughout the day, which is super helpful. It looks at our melatonin levels. It can tell us whether or not we are producing enough melatonin at night all the way to the end, or does it, shut off? And then it also looks at some of our neurotransmitters and some of our nutrients on a very small scale, but I think they're important neurotransmitters and important nutrients. And so it's a little mini OATS test. And OATS is an acronym for organic acid test. And again, it is the metabolite, so it shows us what our bodies are actually doing with the resources that it has. So it's a very exciting test. It is not cheap. It's close to $500. It's $499, so it's $500. And so that, might be prohibitive for some people, and I understand that. But if you are concerned at all, and you kind of want to eliminate some of the worry, I highly recommend it. And then, of course, after the test, you have to pay for somebody to actually look at your test, interpret it, and come up with a protocol and a plan for you. So that's usually between an additional 100 to $200, depending on the practitioner. Now, it is a test that I offer. So if you're interested, let me know. It can be very empowering to do this test. I don't necessarily recommend that somebody does this if they are not menopausal, but they are not on HRT, because I just don't think that you're going to get enough bang for your buck. And I don't know if there's enough hormones circulating in the body to really get a nice number on the estrogen and progesterone. So that's pretty much it when it comes to women's hormones and what we want to test, why we want to test it, and when we want to test it.